I walked into that bank with calm steps and a hopeful heart, like a man going to tie up the last ribbon on a lifetime of careful choices. I had just made the decision, after much thought, to move my life savings into a different account, one with my name, and only my name, on it. Not because I didn't trust my family, but because lately, trust felt like a thin curtain barely hiding something I didn't yet understand. The bank smelled like old carpet and ink. I remember the pen they handed me was blue, slightly chewed at the end. The teller smiled, called the manager like usual, but he didn't smile back at me that day, not like he used to. When he came out, his face was pale, his hands were trembling, as he passed me the folder with the withdrawal form inside. He slipped a small yellow note between the papers. Handwritten, shaky ink. I pulled it out, thinking maybe it was a mistake. But then I read it. Just 5 words. Don't trust your daughter-in-law. I felt something collapse quietly inside my chest, like a floor giving out beneath a tired man who just wanted to rest. I didn't look up right away. I just folded the note, slowly, pretending nothing was wrong. He turned away without a word, and I walked out of that bank with my whole life savings still untouched, and a storm in my hands that hadn't even begun to thunder yet. My name is Walter Grayson. I'm 74 years old. I live in a small town in Ohio, in the same home I built with my wife nearly 50 years ago. She passed not long ago, 3 winters back, give or take, and I've been living with my son, Daniel, and his wife, Marie, ever since. They moved in to help, they said. Marie did most of the talking. Daniel just nodded, eyes always somewhere else. I didn't question it. I was tired of being alone. For the past 2 years, I've paid most of the bills quietly, let them handle the food, the errands. I even handed over some account information when Marie asked, saying it'd make things easier. Easier for whom, I now wonder. That note didn't come out of nowhere. You don't risk your job as a bank manager unless something's truly wrong. His hands, how they trembled, were telling me something he couldn't say out loud. And me? I've lived long enough to know when silence is more dangerous than words. I went home that day and sat at the kitchen table for over an hour without touching my tea. Marie passed by twice, asking nothing. Not where I went, not how I was. I think she already knew. There's a sound that betrayal makes. It's not loud. It's not shouting. It's the clink of a teaspoon on porcelain when your hands are shaking too hard to lift it. And somewhere deep down, I already knew. That note was just the beginning. The quiet in the house that evening felt too perfect, like it had been arranged, like someone had smoothed the wrinkles off a bed that had already been slept in. I sat on the edge of the kitchen chair, the banknote folded inside my front pocket, pressing against my chest with the weight of 1,000 questions I wasn't ready to ask. Marie was chopping vegetables, her back to me. The knife rhythm was steady, too steady. She was humming softly under her breath, something cheerful but off-key, and when I glanced at her, really looked. Her eyes were too calm, like someone who already knew something would go her way. Daniel was nowhere to be found. Upstairs, maybe. Or at work. Though lately I didn't even know where work was for him. He never spoke about it anymore. Just came in late, tired, distant. The kind of tired that doesn't come from labor, but from secrets. I thought about saying something, just asking a small question. What bills had she paid this week? Did she log into the bank account? Why did the credit card statement vanish off the counter yesterday? But I didn't. I couldn't, because part of me didn't want to hear the answer. I walked down the hallway to my bedroom and shut the door gently behind me. Sat on the bed I no longer shared with anyone. The scent of my wife's lavender lotion had faded from the sheets months ago, but I still kept one of her scarves on the pillow beside mine. For comfort, for memory, for the silence. She used to say, "Walter, don't let yourself become invisible." But here I was, breathing in a house that didn't see me, paying for groceries I never chose, listening to whispered phone calls behind thin walls. Marie had started doing that lately, talking in the laundry room, in the garage, even from the front porch when she thought I was napping. Every time I walked by, her voice changed, softer, sharper, like a hand pulling a curtain shut. Once, I saw her holding my bank statements. She folded them in half, tucked them into her purse without looking at me. When I asked what she needed them for, she smiled too quickly and said, "Just sorting through paperwork, Dad." She called me Dad, not Walter, not Mr. Grayson, always Dad, as if saying it could make me forget I wasn't really her father, as if the word could hide her disinterest. But I saw it now. I saw it in her tight-lipped smiles, in the way she stopped refilling my coffee cup at breakfast. Maybe the betrayal didn't start with that note. Maybe it started months ago. Maybe I just didn't want to believe it. That night, I sat in bed and unfolded the yellow note again. I stared at those 5 words under the dim lamp beside me. And for the first time, I whispered them out loud. "Don't trust your daughter-in-law." The words didn't echo. They just stayed there, heavy in the air, pressing against my chest like grief you can't name yet. I folded the paper slowly and placed it in the drawer next to my late wife's wedding ring, and as I closed it I realized something that shook me more than anything I'd read. I think she knew this would happen, long before I ever saw it coming. The next morning I woke to the sound of dishes clinking, chairs scraping, life going on, the kind of life that pretends nothing is wrong. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, listening to Marie's footsteps move from the kitchen to the hallway and back, like a rhythm rehearsed too well. I didn't say much at breakfast. Neither did she. She poured coffee, burned the toast, and hummed a melody I didn't recognize. Caleb sat across from me, his small fingers gripping a crayon, drawing something on the back of a receipt. I smiled at him. He smiled back, pure, untouched. The only one in the house not acting. Daniel walked in 10 minutes later, hair still wet, phone glued to his palm. He muttered, "Morning," kissed Marie on the cheek, and barely looked at me. I used to read the newspaper at this table. Now I felt like one. After they left, I opened the drawer in the hallway where I used to keep receipts. Empty. The filing cabinet? Half the folders were gone. I opened the desk in the guest room where I knew I had left a stack of old checkbooks, tax returns, my life written in numbers and dates. Half of it was missing. I stared at the space where the document should have been, my breath slow and heavy. I didn't panic. I've seen too much in life to panic, but there's a silence that comes when you know the people under your roof are moving against you. It wraps around your ribs and makes it hard to breathe. By noon, I was standing in front of the bank again. I didn't want to go in. My fingers trembled on the door handle, not from fear, but from something worse. Disappointment. Inside, the manager, Thomas, maybe late 40s, sharp eyes behind his glasses, froze when he saw me. I asked politely if I could update my signature card. It was a lie, but a harmless one. While he walked me to a side office, I leaned in slightly and said quietly, "I read the note." His hand stopped mid-motion. He nodded slowly, then shut the door behind us. "I didn't know what else to do, Mr. Grayson," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She came in 2 weeks ago, said she was your caretaker, claimed you were planning to consolidate your accounts, tried to access your savings." My chest tightened. "And?" "We stopped it. Blocked the request, asked for verification. She didn't have any, got upset, left." I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling tiles. Everything I wanted not to believe had just been spoken out loud. "I thought you should know," he added. "These things, they don't always stop the first time." I nodded, stood, thanked him, walked out without looking back. The sun was blinding. I stood on the sidewalk, letting the heat hit my face. My savings, my house, my name, all being passed around behind closed doors like loose change. I used to think staying quiet would keep the peace, that letting things slide was a form of love. But now I understood something far more dangerous. Silence doesn't keep you safe. It just keeps you blind. I didn't speak a word on the ride home from the bank. My hands stayed clenched around the steering wheel, knuckles pale from the pressure. I parked in the same driveway I'd parked in for over 40 years, but something felt different. Like I was pulling into a stranger's home, a guest in the place I once built with calloused hands and aching bones. Inside, the smell of lemon cleaner hung too heavy in the air, like someone had tried to erase a mess that wasn't visible. Marie greeted me with a bright smile, but her eyes didn't match. Too wide, too polished. She offered me lunch, chicken salad on dry bread, and I accepted without tasting a bite. Daniel wasn't home. Out, supposedly, handling errands. These days, errands were the perfect place to disappear. I sat on the porch with Caleb later that afternoon while Marie took a phone call in the kitchen. Her voice was hushed, sharp around the edges. The little boy sat cross-legged next to me, crayons spread across the floor. He was drawing a house. "Whose house is that?" I asked gently, watching his small fingers work. He looked up, bright-eyed. "Yours, Grandpa, the one with the blue door." My throat tightened. I hadn't painted that door in years, but somehow he remembered. I watched as he scribbled a little stick figure on the porch. A man with glasses and gray hair. Me. "You like it here, Caleb?" I asked. He nodded. "It's home." I nearly cried, but not because of joy, because I realized he still believed in something I wasn't sure existed anymore. After he went upstairs, I walked to the back bedroom, my old study before they took it over. I opened the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, where I kept the things I didn't want anyone to touch. The original house deed was still there, folded inside a plain brown envelope. I opened it with trembling fingers. I stared at the signature box for a long time. Mine. Clear. But there was a faint pencil line drawn beneath it. Not ink, not final. But someone had traced it, like practicing. My blood went cold. I remembered Marie asking once if I still had the house documents, saying she wanted to digitize them for safekeeping. I'd said no, but maybe that didn't stop her from looking. I sat on the bed, the deed open in my lap, my heart beating slow and heavy like a drum played in mourning. This house was mine, not just by paper, but by years, by sweat, by sacrifice, and if they wanted to take it quietly, they had picked the wrong man. I folded the deed gently and placed it back in the envelope. Then I whispered something, not to Marie, not to Daniel, to myself. Not this time. The next morning, I dressed a little sharper than usual. Clean shirt, slacks, the belt my wife once bought me on our anniversary. I told Marie I was going to the hardware store. She smiled without looking up from her phone and said, "Don't forget the receipt this time." Her voice carried a tone I used to mistake for kindness. Now it just sounded rehearsed. But I didn't go to the hardware store. I drove across town to a small brick building with peeling white paint, where a rusted sign still hung that read, "Harlan and Graves, Estate Law." It had been years since I'd been there. Reggie Harlan and I served in the same reserve unit long ago, before we both settled into quieter lives. He used to handle small claims and wills for people who couldn't afford the fancy firms. I knocked twice. Reggie opened the door himself, glasses perched low on his nose, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "Walter Grayson," he said, stepping aside. "It's been a minute." Inside smelled like paper and pipe tobacco. We sat in his back office. No assistants, no cameras, just two old men and the silence that comes before hard truths. I unfolded the yellow banknote and laid it on the desk. Then I told him everything. He listened with the patience of someone who's heard worse and hoped not to hear more. When I finished, he leaned back and rubbed his jaw. "You still have the deed?" he asked. "In a locked drawer," I said, "with my name still untouched." He nodded. "Then you're not too late, but you're close." He pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer, his fingers working with quiet confidence. "We'll start with a declaration of sole authority over your accounts. Then a freeze on property transfers, power of attorney revision. Do you have one?" I shook my head. Never thought I needed one. Not from family. His pen stopped. "That's where you went wrong, Walt. Family's where you need it most." By the time I left, I had a folder under my arm and something I hadn't felt in weeks. Direction. Not revenge, not anger, just the calm steel of a man who's choosing not to be erased. That evening, Marie stood in the kitchen chatting with Daniel about knocking out the wall between the dining room and the den. "It'll open everything up," she said. "Make it feel more like ours." Ours. I nodded quietly, took my tea to the table, and opened the folder Reggie gave me. I pulled out the legal pad and placed an old photo beside it. My wife in her Sunday dress, laughing with her whole face. She always said the kitchen table was where battles were won. I picked up the pen, pressed it to the paper, and wrote the first words of my quiet war. Petition to block unauthorized transfers. The courthouse was quiet the morning I filed the documents. Just the buzz of overhead lights and the soft squeak of my shoes on old linoleum tiles. I walked with the weight of decades in my chest, but my steps were steady. Reggie stood beside me as the clerk stamped the last page with a hollow thud that somehow sounded like dignity returning. It was done. The ownership was reaffirmed, the power of attorney dissolved, and every account they might have touched now had one name on it. Mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole again, like a man waking up inside his own life. At home, I slipped the sealed documents into my locked cabinet and went about the day as if nothing had changed. Marie noticed. I could see it in the way she watched me, too long, too carefully. Her smiles lingered a second too late, like she was trying to decide whether I still fit into whatever plan she had drawn in her head. That evening, while stirring a pot of stew, she turned to me and said casually, "You ever think about downsizing, Walter? Less house to worry about. Easier for everyone." I met her gaze. "No." She blinked, just once. "Well, maybe someday." Her voice was light. Her hands didn't stop stirring. But I heard it. The wish. I spent most of that night in the garage pretending to organize old tools. The truth is, I just needed space. Space to think. Space to hear my own heartbeat over the noise of a house that no longer felt like mine, even though I'd just reclaimed it. I remembered the time years ago when Daniel had his first fever. He was maybe 5. I sat by his bedside the whole night, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth, whispering lullabies I barely remembered. I would have given my life for him then. But now, around midnight, I heard his voice through the vent, low, serious, phone pressed to his ear. "I'm telling you," he said. "If he signs, we're clear. If not, we find another way." I didn't move. My breath slowed. I felt something inside me fracture. Not break, but shift permanently. I didn't hear the rest of the call. I didn't need to. Because in that moment I knew something I hadn't dared admit until now. This wasn't just Marie's doing. My own son was in on it. And maybe he had been all along. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. The words kept echoing inside my skull like a slow drum beat. If not, we find another way. I lay still, staring at the ceiling fan turning overhead. Every creak of the blades felt louder than the last. I tried to remind myself of the boy Daniel once was, the boy who held my hand during thunderstorms, the boy who cried when his pet turtle died. But every memory now came laced with bitterness, like something sweet that had spoiled quietly over time. The next morning I made coffee for everyone like usual. Set out 3 mugs. Daniel gave me a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Marie was already scrolling on her phone, looking up something with inheritance in the title. She didn't bother to hide it. I suppose she didn't think I'd notice, or care. Over breakfast she mentioned casually, "We should really help you sort out your will, Walter. It's just responsible at your age, you know. Not that we're rushing anything." She chuckled lightly. "It's just smart planning." I nodded once. "You're right. Smart planning is important." She smiled wide, thinking she'd won something. After they left the kitchen, I went to my study, locked the door, opened the cabinet where I kept the files Reggie helped me secure. I began copying everything: ID cards, insurance policies, bank letters. I opened my safe and added a second lock. Then I wrote down the names of people I could still trust: Reggie, my neighbor Pete from 3 doors down, maybe even Pastor Ellis from the old church. I wasn't planning for death. I was preparing for war. Later that day, Marie brought me tea I didn't ask for. She hovered, her eyes too soft, her words too kind. "You've always been so generous, Walter. Daniel and we're lucky to have you." I looked her straight in the eye and smiled back. "Funny. I was just thinking how lucky I am to still have my name on everything." That night, I passed by the living room and heard them laughing. Daniel's voice rang out, low and smug. "Don't worry, babe. He's getting tired. He won't fight forever." I stood in the hallway, heart cracking open in slow silence. Upstairs, I sat on my bed and pulled out a photo from my nightstand drawer. It was worn, corners soft from years of handling. Me and Daniel, fishing at the lake. He couldn't have been more than 7. He was smiling at the camera, proud of the little trout he caught. I was smiling too, though back then I had no idea what it meant to love someone who might one day try to gut you with a handshake. I held that photo to my chest, and for the first time in years, I let the tears fall. But not because I was weak, because I was finally ready to stop pretending this was still a family. The next few days passed like a slow fog. I kept my voice calm, my hands steady, my steps quiet. But inside, everything had changed. I was no longer trying to hold on to peace. I was preparing for a storm. Reggie called back Tuesday afternoon. "We can file the trust this week," he said. "List you as the sole beneficiary, with emergency conditions in case of mental competence claims. It'll keep them locked out unless they go through a judge." "Do it," I said. "All of it." He paused for a beat. "Walt, are you safe in that house?" I looked out the window where Caleb was playing in the yard, laughter echoing through the glass like a song from another world. "Not sure," I said, "but I'm still standing." When I got off the call, I made photocopies of the deed again, updated my emergency contacts, and wrote down all account numbers in 2 notebooks, one locked in the cabinet, the other taped behind an old drawer in the garage. At dinner, Marie hovered too much. "You feeling all right, Walter?" she asked, refilling my glass before I finished it. "You've seemed a little forgetful." I smiled. "Memory's fine, eyes too." She laughed, but I saw the twitch in her jaw. "Maybe we should schedule a checkup, just to be safe. You're not as young as you used to be." "None of us are," I said, staring directly at her. Daniel chewed in silence. He hadn't said much in days, just nodded, grunted, looked past me like I was already gone. After dinner, I sat on the porch with Caleb again. He was coloring with bright greens and reds, tongue poking out in focus. "What are you drawing today, buddy?" I asked. He turned the page toward me proudly. "It's our house," he said. "See? Mommy, Daddy, me." I looked. He had drawn 3 figures inside the house. One more lying down on a bench outside under a tree. "Who's that?" I asked gently. He looked up, blinking. "That's you, Grandpa. Mommy said you might be moving soon." The words hit harder than any courtroom verdict. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped something out of me while I slept. I patted his head, smiled, said nothing. That night, long after they went to bed, I stood in the backyard under the stars. The same backyard where I once planted apple trees with Daniel. The same patch of grass where I taught him how to pitch. The house looked different at night. Quiet, shadowed, almost indifferent. Like it didn't remember the hands that built it. I looked up at its windows, its roof line, the cracked paint I once swore I'd fix. Then I whispered into the wind, soft but certain, "You will not bury me before I'm dead." The wind was cold the morning I signed the trust. Reggie stood beside me in his office desk. Glasses fogged slightly as he read the final clauses out loud. Everything was airtight, ownership protected, emergency clauses in place, witnesses notarized, locked down like a vault. We appointed my late wife's cousin, Evelyn, a retired librarian with a steel backbone, as the emergency trustee. She lived 2 towns over and hated Marie since the wedding. Perfect. We also recorded a statement, video. Me, sitting straight, clear-eyed, speaking my name, the date, and my intentions. No slurring, no confusion, just a man taking back what was his. When it was done, Reggie leaned forward and said, "You've got everything covered now." I nodded. Almost. Back home, the tension had shifted. Marie had stopped pretending. Her smiles were stiff now, like paint cracking off an old fence. She asked fewer questions, gave shorter answers. Daniel barely spoke at all, just left early, came home late, drank more than he used to. The walls of the house felt thinner. Every room echoed with things unsaid. Late that afternoon, I went to the garage to look for an old photo album. Instead, I found something else. Tucked behind a dusty stack of boxes was a manila envelope. No label, just a red paper clip. I opened it. Inside, a real estate appraisal. Property condition, suitable for immediate market. Occupancy, vacant, suggested. Listing timeline, 30 days. I stared at it for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't quicken. Just a deep stillness, the kind that comes right before thunder. There was no signature, no letter attached. But I didn't need one. They weren't planning to ask me. They were planning to erase me. I closed the envelope slowly and carried it inside. The kitchen was empty. Caleb was upstairs. The house, for once, was silent. I walked to the hallway, past the worn wood floors and the crooked family portraits, and into my bedroom. Sat on the bed. Took out the small silver frame from my nightstand, the one with Helen's photo. Her smile, frozen forever in that summer sun, still warmed something in me. I laid the appraisal beside her, angled slightly so she could see it. And then I said softly, like I used to speak to her before falling asleep, "They've already decided, sweetheart." But they forgot one thing. I looked at the paper again. I'm still here. There's a moment, right before you put your name on paper, when your whole life flickers through your chest. Not as memories, but as weight. Every year, every lie you forgave, every truth you swallowed, it all presses down at once. That's how I felt at the county office, standing at the glass counter, watching the clerk stamp my signature into permanence. A legal hold on the house, a formal directive. Nothing, not a sale, not a transfer, not even a fence replacement, could move forward without my signed approval. Not anymore. The house, my house, was sealed. And they didn't know. Later that afternoon, I met Evelyn at a diner off the highway. She wore her usual navy coat, buttoned to the throat, and carried a file folder thicker than a Bible. "Everything looks good," she said, flipping through the pages. "If anything happens, God forbid, I'll enforce it all." I nodded. "They've been trying to move things, quietly." Evelyn scoffed. "Not anymore, they won't." When I got home, the sun was already low. I slipped through the door quietly. Marie didn't hear me. She was in the dining room, phone pressed to her ear, voice hushed but hurried. "No, I promise the paperwork should be ready soon. He's just dragging his feet. Once we get it signed, we'll move fast. The market's good." She paused, then laughed. "Of course he has no idea. He thinks we're just helping him get organized." My hand tightened on the stair railing. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, tried to breathe. A few minutes later, Caleb walked in with his arms full of toys. He held up his favorite, blue plastic dinosaur, missing one leg, paint faded from love. "Grandpa," he asked innocently, "do you think I can take this with me when we go to the new house?" My heart cracked wide open. "What new house, buddy?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. "Mommy said we might get a big house soon, with a pool." I smiled gently. "You'll always have a place with me, Caleb." He grinned and ran off, dinosaur tucked under his arm. I sat in the dark for a while. Then I walked to the mirror, turned on the light, and looked at myself long and hard, adjusted my collar, straightened my shoulders. Tomorrow, I would no longer pretend. I wasn't just Walter Grayson, retired railroad worker, quiet old man in the corner. I was the owner of this house, and it was time they remembered that. It was raining that morning, the soft kind of rain, gentle, steady, the kind that sounds like truth falling from the sky. I laid the envelope on the kitchen table before anyone else came downstairs. Inside, notarized copies of the trust, the freeze order, the ownership statement, the emergency protections, and a cover letter typed by Reggie himself. No threats, no rage, just facts. I didn't sit there to watch them find it. I put on my coat, took a long walk down our street, past the church, the old playground, the corner store that still sold penny candy. My steps were slow, deliberate, not heavy with fear, just heavy with history. By the time I returned, the sky was clearing. So was the house. I walked in and heard nothing at first, but the silence didn't last. Marie came storming into the hallway like thunder in heels, the papers crumpled in her fist. "What is this?" she snapped, eyes wild. "You went behind our backs?" "Our?" I asked. She faltered for just a second, then raised her voice again. "After everything we've done for you? You're being paranoid. This is elder abuse. You can't just take things back." I looked at her, calm as stone. "I never gave them away." Daniel came in then. His face was pale, lips tight. He didn't say anything, just stood near the doorway, arms crossed. "You're being unfair," Marie hissed. "You're making us look like thieves." I leaned on the counter, met her eyes. "If you weren't stealing, the locks wouldn't bother you." She went silent. For a long moment no one moved. Then Daniel spoke, barely above a whisper. "Dad, you didn't have to do this." I turned to him. "Didn't I?" He looked away. Marie scoffed and threw the papers back on the table. "Fine. If you want to die alone with your paperwork, go ahead." She walked out. Her heels echoed across the tile like punctuation marks. Sharp. Final. Daniel stayed in the doorway, staring at the ground. "Why?" I asked. His voice cracked when he answered. "Because it was supposed to be easier this way." I nodded slowly. "For you," I said. He didn't deny it, didn't even look at me, just turned and followed her. I stood there, alone in the quiet kitchen, the clock ticking, the rain starting again, faint against the windows. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own home. I felt like a man who had finally said no, without raising his voice, without lifting a hand. Just no. The days that followed were quiet in the way winter mornings are. Still, tense, cold, beneath the silence. Marie didn't speak to me unless absolutely necessary. When she did, her words were clipped, tight, like a rope pulled too hard. "The plumber's coming Friday. Dinner's in the fridge. There's mail on the counter." Every sentence felt like it had been filtered through a mouth that wanted to scream but had no permission anymore. Daniel started coming home later and later. No explanation, no excuses. Sometimes he wouldn't even eat. He'd walk past me like I was just another chair in the room. Something he couldn't look at without guilt boiling over. I didn't push. I didn't ask. I had already seen enough. But the boy, Caleb, he still came to me like nothing had changed. One afternoon he brought me another drawing, crayons smeared all over his hands. He grinned, showing his missing tooth, and held it up proudly. "This one's better," he said. It was the house again. Only this time, I was inside it, standing by the window, smiling. Tears came quick and hot. I turned my face slightly, not wanting him to see, but he hugged me anyway, arms small and certain around my shoulders. "Mommy's mad," he whispered. I nodded. "I know, but I'm not." That night, I sat at my desk and opened the last of the legal folders Reggie had mailed me. I revised the will. The house would go to Caleb, not Daniel, not Marie, Caleb, when he was old enough to understand responsibility. Until then, Evelyn would hold it in trust. I signed it slowly, steadily, then I placed it in the safe. I drank my tea at the kitchen table under soft yellow light. The kind Helen used to say made the house feel warm, even on bad days. Across the hall I saw her, Marie, standing just inside the shadows, watching me, not speaking, not moving, just staring. There was no hate in her eyes anymore, no fire, only the quiet recognition of someone who realizes they lost a game they thought they controlled. I lifted my cup, took a sip, and held her gaze without blinking. Then she turned away. No words needed. Because sometimes the loudest sentence is silence. The first time I visited Helen's grave in months, I didn't bring flowers. I brought the truth. I sat on the cool stone bench beside her, the sun low behind the trees, painting the grass in gold and shadow. I placed my hand on the top of her headstone and whispered the only thing that felt right. I handled it. The wind moved gently through the leaves above me, like a sigh she might have made if she were sitting next to me. I told her everything, about the papers, the lies, the moment Caleb showed me that drawing. I told her about Evelyn and the trust, about Reggie's face when I showed him the appraisal. And when I was done, I sat in silence, like I used to after dinner, when she'd read on the couch and I'd sit nearby, listening to her breathe. That evening, back home, I raked the backyard while the sun dipped behind the house. I found an old baseball under the bushes, still faintly marked with Caleb's name. I smiled, put it in my pocket. Marie and Daniel were barely speaking to each other now. I heard her once, yelling about wasted time and stupid plans. She didn't bother to keep her voice down anymore. The house that used to echo with Sunday dinners now echoed with resentment. And then, on a quiet Tuesday night, Daniel came to me. He didn't knock, just walked in and sat down at the dining room table where I was sipping tea. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he said, eyes fixed on the tabletop. "Marie kept pushing. Said we'd be fine. Said you wouldn't notice." I said nothing. "She told me we could get ahead." that you wouldn't mind. Not really. You'd want to help. Still, I waited. Finally, he looked up. His voice cracked. I just didn't know how to stop her. I stared at him for a long moment. The boy I raised was still somewhere in there, but buried, covered in years of excuses and silence. When I finally spoke, it came out low, steady. You stopped being my son the moment I became your target. His eyes filled, but no tears fell. He stood slowly, like a man waking from a long dream he didn't want to admit he had. I'm sorry, he whispered. Then he walked out. No door slam, no angry reply. Just footsteps fading down the hallway. I sat there, alone, not angry, not even sad, just hollow. Because loving someone doesn't mean keeping the knife in your back. Sometimes it means pulling it out and letting them walk away. They left on a Thursday. No shouting, no drama, just cardboard boxes and short trips to the car. Marie didn't say goodbye. She didn't look at me, just packed what she could and vanished like a draft through a broken window. Daniel lingered. He stood in the foyer, hand on the doorknob, eyes glassy. Thank you for letting us stay as long as you did, he said. I gave him a small nod. There was nothing left to say. When the door closed behind him, I stood in the hallway for a long time. The quiet stretched around me like a blanket, thick, heavy, familiar. Only now, it wasn't laced with tension. It was mine again. I opened the windows, let the breeze back in, dusted off the bookshelf and put Helen's favorite teacup back on display. I trimmed the hedges that had gone wild in spring, watered the tomatoes, took down the heavy curtains Marie said were too old-fashioned. In the evenings, I sat on the porch and listened to the wind move through the trees. Sometimes Caleb would visit, his small feet pounding up the steps. Daniel would drop him off. No eye contact, no lingering, just a wave and gone. But Caleb? He'd run into the kitchen like nothing had changed, draw pictures, chase bugs in the yard, ask endless questions about trains and clouds and old people stuff. I started writing him letters, one every week. Tucked them in a locked drawer in my desk, labeled with his name, sealed with care. They weren't about Marie or Daniel. They were about the things I wanted him to know, about life, about love, about standing tall even when your knees want to buckle, about how men don't become strong by staying silent, and how legacy isn't money, it's memory. The house is quiet now, but I'm not lonely, not anymore. I've reclaimed more than just the walls and the paperwork. I've reclaimed my voice. So if you're hearing this, or watching or reading some version of what I've lived through, listen closely. Protect your home. Protect your voice. Even if it shakes. The letter arrived in late autumn. No return address. Just my name, written in a hand I knew too well. Slanted, uneven, like someone unsure if they should be writing at all. I stared at it for a while before opening it. Inside were only a few lines. Dad, Marie left. It didn't work. Caleb's okay. I'm working at Miller's Hardware. I'm trying. Daniel. No apology, no excuses, just truth. I folded it slowly, placed it on the mantel next to the picture of Helen. I didn't feel triumphant, just tired, and maybe somewhere deep under the dust and disappointment, a little relieved. Later that week, Caleb came by for his usual weekend visit. He was wearing a red jacket too big for his arms and holding a bag of Halloween candy in one hand. We built a cardboard fort in the living room, ate grilled cheese, watched cartoons I couldn't follow. Then, as he climbed onto my lap to show me a crayon map of a make-believe island, he asked quietly, "Do you think Daddy misses you?" I didn't answer at first, because the truth was, maybe he did. And maybe that didn't fix anything. But maybe it mattered anyway. I stood, walked to the desk, opened the drawer where I'd been keeping the letters. I pulled out one, not the first, not the last. The one about forgiveness. I knelt beside him and handed it over. "This is for you," I said. His eyes lit up. "Can I read it?" "Not yet," I said, smiling. "But one day." He hugged me tight, dinosaur toy clutched in his hand, hair smelling like cold wind and childhood. That night I sat on the porch, the letter from Daniel still resting in my pocket. I didn't know what came next, didn't need to, because for the first time in a long while I realized peace doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with a crack in the wall, just wide enough to let the light in.